Good morning. I'm beginning to think that the gravest danger this country faces today is the total loss of respect for our system of parliamentary government. In Ottawa this morning, after Parliament being paralysed and going to be paralysed for a couple of days more, Eric Nielsen, who admits to having listened in to the caucus meetings of the Liberals in Ottawa, finally makes a kind of partial apology. He got up this morning and he said, "While the events of which I speak are long past, I apologize to those who believe that proprieties were violated 25 years ago by my conduct." In other words, those who believe, the implication being that he is not disturbed by the improprieties in his past. And then when you turn to the provincial government, you feel kind of sorry for Bill Bennett. When he wakens in the morning, he must wonder what's going to hit him next. Now, as you well know, he's going to go on a province-wide BC TV broadcast on Wednesday night. What the dickens is he going to do? I'm inclined to believe that what he should do now is call an election, because I don't think it's an exaggeration to say there is a crisis of confidence about Premier Bennett and his cabinet in British Columbia. Apart from the other crises which we face, one of the greatest economic difficulties we have ever seen in British Columbia. Now, I'm not going to prate and be fancy about the problems, the most recent problems which affecting Jim Nielsen and earlier Bob McClellan. But surely to goodness, the situation is now that having been sorely embarrassed by both these happenings, Mr. Bennett must make quite sure that neither Mr. McClellan nor Mr. Nielsen run in the next election. Not a question of probing into their private lives. Private lives are private as long as they don't surface publicly and embarrass the government and the cabinet. It's a hard thing to say, but we must demand the highest possible appearance of government. It's the old Caesar's wife's rule. You must not only be clean, but you must be seen to be clean. I am not about to delve into the whirlwinds of confusion in the public minds over Messrs. Waterland, Rogers, Curtis, even Parks and Pelton. We must be told clearly and succinctly what constitutes acceptable behavior, innocent though it may be, and what does not constitute acceptable behavior. And once that is done, perhaps then we can turn to the incredible, I'm quite sure for tomorrow, for Wednesday night, Premier Bennett, God bless him, is going to go rah, rah, rah for Expo. Everybody in British Columbia, without exception, is going to go rah, rah, rah for Expo. All the carping and the criticism and the niggling has long gone. Everyone in British Columbia is going to do their damnedest to make sure the Expo is a success. And we have been deluged with Partners in Progress and ads in the newspapers and all the other preparation for an election. Now, when is that election going to be? When is it going to deal bluntly up front with the massive unemployment in British Columbia, the replacement of high-paid jobs with low-paid jobs? When you look at the most left-wing party in British Columbia, short of the Communist Party, but publicly elected party, and see what the people of Vancouver did to Heinrich in a full sweep of COPE candidates, you wonder how much faith the public has in the social credit government of Victoria. And when you look at Northeast Coal and Quintet writing off $240 million, and every other big company writing off its unrecoverable debts in many ways, and you look at Brick at $1.93, and you look at the situation in towns in British Columbia, now is the time to recreate some confidence in British Columbia and have an election, and let's have it out. Fair enough. Now I'm going to turn to the federal field. And I have a politician this morning who's been accused in the House of Commons of having his ear pulled by friends of the government. That is Tom Siddon, our new Fisheries Minister. You see, you can be Science Minister one day and become an instant expert in the fishing industry the next day. And Tom Siddon is going to take calls from fishermen who know more about the problems than I do this morning. And then, on a kind of straightforward repertorial basis, I went out on receipt of a letter from a man in mountain prison at Agassiz who certainly feels he has been denied its constitutional and legal rights as he serves a 35-year prison sentence and hasn't had a proper parole hearing since May 1977. He's still a young man, and maybe he was denied his rights. Here's what he tells us about his parole situation.
I've been in the hole 7 years, and I figured, well, if I'm in the hole in a maximum security joint for 7 years, you automatically aren't going to get anything because they refuse to parole big sentences from a maximum security penitentiary, so I didn't apply anymore. I just quit applying.
All right.
I give up.
And this is Ken Ewan's, and it's not a bleeding heart story, but it's what happens to a man in jail. But off the top, Tom Siddon's from Science to Salmon. Tom Siddon is the new Fisheries Minister in Canada. And you'll remember your predecessor, good friend of both of ours.
Remember John very well.
Got into great trouble because he kept taking phone calls from people like Dickie Hatfield, right, during the Tunagate caper. And I see in the papers already that you're accused of listening to former aides of Defence Minister Robert Coates to grant federal fisheries licenses. True or false?
False. I listened to members of Parliament from the Atlantic and Pacific regions of Canada in order to look after the interests of the communities they serve. We have a chance to develop an important resource off the east coast of Canada, these clam beds, and the various groups who wanted to go out fishing for clams came to me and proposed that they be allowed to go fishing. I have allowed up to 6 licenses, and I've invited several companies to apply for those licenses.
Did you get any special phone calls or lobbying from former executive assistants?
Absolutely not.
None? No
special phone calls from any former executive assistants.
A company, I'm going to quote Molyneux, a company that owes the Revenue Department about $1 million and owns few resources and no fish boats, but does have a director with political connections, can be awarded a government fishing contract. Has it been awarded?
There's been no contracts awarded. We have invited license applications, and we will be confirming licenses to 3 or 4 companies, of which that particular company is one. And there is no evidence of any tax judgments or any illegality on the part of any of the principals of that company. This is a smear, Jack, of the sort that is mounted by other people for whatever malicious political reasons. And I have been completely above board and fair in receiving applications, and the officials of the department in Atlantic Canada are applying the conditions evenly to all of the applicants.
But you'll have to make sure that there is no appearance of former executive assistants or anybody else getting an edge.
I can only do the best I can, and certainly I'm not in any way inclined to want to give special advantage to any particular group or individual.
Now, these clam digging licenses, do they get federal subsidies?
There's no financial involvement. All we're doing is approving the entry of up to 6 vessels that are equipped to dig for clams on an experimental basis for 4 months to go out and tell us if there's enough clams there to support an industry.
And none of this, remember that liberal ripoff for scientific and research grants, billions of dollars?
Nothing like that associated
that's not
with
applicable
this.
anymore.
That was a great boondoggle that cost all the people of Canada immensely.
I believe it was about $3.5 billion.
$3.5 billion, and you saw the stories last week about how much of that was abused right here in British Columbia.
Curl your hair, wouldn't it?
Well, more than that, it'll hit you in the pocketbook too.
Now, last year with John Fraser, we had a great brouhaha about the restriction of trawlers in the Gulf to the advantage of the Chinook fishermen. And as I recall, the take was what, about 240,000 Chinook in the Gulf?
Actually, the limit is 275,000 Chinook.
By whom?
As imposed under the terms of the Canada-Pacific Salmon Treaty with the Americans. The purpose is to try to rebuild those wild Chinook stocks. And last year, the split was 225,000 for the sport fishermen, 50,000 for the Gulf trawler. I haven't yet decided, although I have a recommendation before me, as to whether we should continue with that split this year.
But it looks like it might be about the same.
Probably about the same. And that means if the Gulf trawlers have a grievance, and I believe that they do have some legitimate grievance, I have to look for other ways to help them out by giving them access perhaps to other stocks because they, in some respects, have a legitimate point of view.
Any buyback boondoggles coming up, as has been the tradition of the Liberals?
Not that I'm prepared to recommend at the present time. We won't solve the problem of the West Coast fishery by buying out boats. We will solve it by producing more fish. And I'd far rather put dollars, taxpayers' dollars, into salmonid enhancement on the first priority rather than buying out the licenses of people who will profit in many cases without ever having actually gone out and done
Where are you
fishing.
going to get the money for the salmonid, clumsy word, enhancement?
Well, we have, salmonid is the fancy name the biologists like to use. We have been putting $40 million a year into that program in the last several years, and I have confirmed that amount of money for 1986, but I'm asking the industry to put up 20, and that is to include, I hope, an increased contribution from the provincial government, increased revenues from license fees by the sport fishermen, and a landings charge or some form of cost recovery from the commercial sector, because I think it's only fair that we ask those who benefit directly from this common property resource to pay part of the cost of developing it.
Was that landing charge, that so-called royalty, implemented last year?
No, and it has been something that has been around, lying in the bushes for up to 10 years. You may remember Peter Pierce, Dr. Pierce, recommended we move in that direction.
Right.
Some people have viewed it as a supplementary tax. I view it as a share in the investment. Just as a farmer has to put fertilizer and seed in the ground, I think the industry that benefits should help to pay the cost of developing more salmon resources.
Wasn't there some embarrassment last year when that incredible run of sockeye appeared, which nobody expected? It was a great bonanza.
Certainly was.
Does that mean that
we'd like to see more bonanzas, but we like to be able to predict them so we don't let them go to waste.
Yeah,
it's something I'm looking at very carefully.
That one came from nowhere, didn't it?
Well, it came from somewhere, but it was certainly unexpected up in the Skeena River system. And it's that type of a situation which, while seemingly good news, has to be prevented by good management.
By knowing they're coming.
By knowing they're coming.
Let's get the fishermen, have at Tom Siddon. See how much, I know very little about the fishing industry except on breaking stories, how much you can nail them to the cross or questions you want to ask Tom Siddon right now after the break. Believe you me. Tom Siddon is the new Fisheries Minister for Canada. Go ahead to Tom Siddon.
Yes, Mr. Siddon, just a few quick comments. As far as your government's concerned, you've done absolutely nothing yet for West Coast fisheries. All your promises, you promised us the moon, you haven't even given us a piece of cheese.
What did I promise you, sir?
You promised a buyback, more money for enhancement. You've cut funding for the West Coast fishery already. You're on record for that. As far as your royalties go, you're way out of line on royalties.
Where did we cut funding for West Coast
If I
fishing?
make money as a fisherman, I'll be paying income tax, okay. As far as enhancement and this and that, go after the logging companies that have destroyed all the habitat in this province. Get on to high sea salmon fishing. They're taking our stocks on the high seas. You know this. Get after those guys. As far as the Americans go, get them cut down because they're taking a lot more fish than we're taking of theirs. So if you go after those things, maybe we'll have a few more fish at home.
Okay,
If I might just comment, sir, in fact, my predecessor, the Honorable John Fraser, concluded the Pacific Salmon Treaty, which will bring tremendous benefit to British Columbia and allow us to make a major investment on the Fraser River system to produce a lot more fish for the fishermen and their families of British Columbia.
That's fine and dandy, providing that you people give some money to enhance these stocks that were destroyed, not by fishermen, but by other industries, and go after those guys and make them pay. Don't make me pay because...
Sir, fishermen also catch the stocks, and they're part of the consumption.
Stocks are self-perpetuating, and they will keep coming back as long as it's managed right. But there's been mismanagement and an encroachment, a gross encroachment on the habitat.
Okay, thank you.
We're changing that, sir, but I'd remind you that last year's salmon landings were 100,000 metric tons plus, twice what they were the previous year. There's even more fish in the sea under this new Tory government.
Maybe we could do a David Suzuki and just stop logging altogether. After all, who cares?
Well, who cares, Jack?
I care.
Yeah, 3/4 of the population of this province cares.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Saturday I went to buy a can of tuna, and the only tuna I could buy was canned in Thailand.
You didn't find any Starkist, I gather.
And I wondered when this tuna fiasco in Canada was going to get squared away.
He said he could only buy tuna canned in Thailand.
Well, you know, it's interesting that the tuna that was being canned by Starkist was all brought in from other parts of the world in any event. And what we have to assure is that when that tuna is processed in Canada, we produce a product of ultimate quality. And my predecessor fell on misfortune for circumstances which we cannot delve into here, but I intend to ensure that any tuna placed on the shelves of Canadian stores, whether imported or processed in Canada, is of the ultimate quality, and we're taking measures at the present time to see that that happens.
Do you mean that we don't catch the tuna that these people
No,
can?
we have a small amount of albacore tuna off the west coast, but the real large yellowfin and bluefin tuna
Came
is brought
from
up from
other
Mexico and elsewhere.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello, Mr. Siddon.
How are you, sir?
Siddon.
I'd like to ask you, are you going to drop government insurance for boats?
You mean, are we going to cancel the fishing vessel insurance program?
Yeah.
Commercial fishing boats. Well, there was a proposal that scheme be privatized. Under Mr. Fraser, we re-examined the question to see if perhaps we could continue to operate it as a government service, but at a full cost recovery, that is, without a major subsidy. Given the problems in the insurance industry of the last few months with very rapid escalation of premiums, we're now very anxious to ensure that we don't leave fishermen high and dry without insurance on their boats. So I'm moving on that question, but I don't have any decisions to announce today.
In other words, you were going to privatize insurance for the commercial fishing boats. You have now reconsidering your previous decision to privatize.
Let's look at what's happening in the insurance industry and these very large judgments and decide whether we might get ourselves into more trouble than advantage by doing so.
So you may back down on your original policy decision.
Mr. Fraser already had partially backed down, and it's a question of whether the taxpayer should subsidize insurance for fishermen or not.
Thank you. That's good enough. Go ahead, please.
That me?
That's you, sir.
Good. Mr. Siddon, in regards to the cost of insurance of fishing vessels, nearly 40% of all the marine problems up and down the west coast occur off the Steveston Lighthouse.
Yes?
Because of the peculiar circumstance of the fresh water coming out of the Fraser River at a very high speed and meeting with a very, very bad westerly wind. In 1984, I proposed that a few ton of rock be dumped on the outer end of the Steveston jetty to bring about half a mile of that jetty up to 16 feet, which is high tide. To do that would cost very few dollars. It would save a hell of a lot of cost in insurance and wrecks. Last year in 3 openings, we lost 3 boats out there. We didn't lose any lives, but think of the cost to the insurance.
Okay, what's the...
$2,000 spent there would be a heck of a good insurance premium, and I see you have made an announcement on Friday that somebody is going to spend from federal funds $1.3 million to do up that old bunch of rotten boards at the bottom end of Steveston that used to be the
Georgia Cannery.
Georgia Cannery. Now, we are prepared to spend money there and not to save people's lives is something that I just can't fathom.
Well, first of all, sir, you're assuming that I'm not prepared to do something about the Steveston problem. In fact, this matter has been brought to my attention in the short space of time since I was appointed minister, and I'm seriously looking at whether within the Small Craft Harbors budget or with the assistance of the Department of Public Works that we can build a proper shelter point, a calm area of refuge for vessels which have trouble off the Steveston jetty. I must point out, however, that the Small Craft Harbors program is immensely costly to the taxpayers of Canada generally, in that we are subsidizing the moorage of both pleasure craft and commercial sports, commercial fishing vessels to the tune of $200 to $500 per vessel each year. And so I have to decide whether we can afford to pour more money into heavily subsidized moorages for fishing boats, or pour more money into the type of special project that you've recommended this morning, sir.
I mean, you still maintain and build all the federal wharfs and docks, and you also build moorages for fishing boats.
That's right, and it's become a major empire. I have a budget this year of $46 million to maintain 2,200 harbors across Canada, and the cost of maintaining them this year is $125 million. I've got less than half as much money as I need just to dredge and maintain these docks.
Yeah, you're not talking
which we're
about
subsidizing.
Vancouver or big ports. You're
I'm talking about Steveston, Campbell River, and ports all around Atlantic Canada and in Ontario.
How much a year?
It's costing, I have a budget of $46 million, and the estimate of cost to bring those ports up to standard is $125 million this year.
You can't do it.
Can't do it.
Jack, listen, about this mooring business. I pay for 12 months ahead for my berth down at Steveston. I pay more than what the moorage rate is for what they call security and service. In other words, I pay over twice the advertised rate in total, and I pay 12 months ahead, so that the company BC, they have a cash flow coming in. Then I'm away from the berth 5-6 months a year. When I go to Ucluelet, Bamfield, all those other places up north, I pay. Every time I tie up alongside the wharf for a night, I pay there.
Well, maybe Tom will put up the fees.
And while I'm away from my berth, which I've paid for 12 months, the wharf people rent it out again. So they get a lot of money in that they don't.
All I'm telling you, sir, is that the money we get in is 20% of what it costs to operate and maintain and dredge those harbors.
How much has your budget been cut under the federal restrictions?
The overall fisheries budget?
Yeah.
About 25 million last year to about 600 million. But let me tell you that in the past 10 years, the budget of the Department of Fisheries increased by 60%, and the value of the fish only increased by a few percent. So there's a very important need, and it's time that we reorganized and streamlined the department.
I'll take some more calls now to Tom Siddon after the break. Tom Siddon, did you find much, or did the Tories find much fat in the department, which with your philosophy you're going to cut out?
I think the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is over-administered. I think a major streamlining is necessary. The Nielsen Task Force have produced some recommendations to that effect. And I've made it clear to my new deputy, Dr. Peter Mayboom, and my senior officials that before we start cutting programs and support to the fishermen, we've got to clean up our act at head office. So we will be taking some measures to that end. And hopefully the funds we free up by creating a more streamlined, lean and mean organization can be diverted to the benefit of the industry we serve.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen.
How are you, sir?
Mr. Siddon, now I have very good reason to believe that the native Indians will be allowed through negotiations a larger slice of the salmon harvest, and I'd like to know what present commercial user group will be sacrificed or cut back to meet this increased pressure on the resource. Now, are these people who are cut back going to be compensated for in some form of a buyback of their boats, or what do you have planned for this?
First of all, let's ask a question. Are you going to increase the native salmon catch to the detriment of other fishermen?
Well, Jack, the gentleman said he had very good reason to believe. I'm the Minister of Fisheries, and I'm meeting with my colleague David Crombie, and I don't think the caller should jump to any conclusions till he hears what I have to say and how we attempt to approach the problem. Mr. Crombie and I have recently together agreed that in terms of the management, the integrated management of the salmon stocks on the West Coast watershed and the various river systems, that the Minister of Fisheries has to have control of the overall integrated management structure. We cannot have spot management here and there which is uncorrelated so that we can't control the actual return to the spawning beds. Having accepted that as a starting point, we then have to look at enhancement as the way to create additional stocks, and those who contribute most to enhancement should receive a greater proportion of the benefits.
I remember the caper and kerfuffle on Capilano River last year when the Indians apparently could take every fish that they wanted to without let or hindrance and nobody else could. Is that not the kind of thing that seriously damages stock?
There is a concern that in the face of the land claims issues and the question of trying to satisfy those long unresolved problems, that somehow the government might be prepared to trade fish for financial compensation, and that's not on with me. If it's a question of producing more stocks and the native people are involved in that process, I am going to work diligently to see that they get a fair share of that increase. If it's a question of taking from some other sector, then I am certainly not anxious to create any major upheaval in the industry.
Well, that's pretty good. In other words, you're not at the moment predisposed to give more fish to the Indians unless there are more stocks available, and you therefore are not predisposed to cut back on anybody else's take at the moment.
I'm proposing that we do what makes good sense in consultation with all of the affected groups and not to take sides and create great issues of confrontation.
Go ahead from Tassis.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Siddon.
How are you?
I'm responding first to your statement to Mr. Webster that you wouldn't want anyone to profit from the buyback or any other situation with licenses. I'm wondering if we could address the black cod industry now, where you're proposing for the 86 fishery pyramiding as part of the license. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am. Do you agree with that, ma'am?
No, I don't see where the conservation comes in.
Well, just let me tell you that I'm not proposing it. In fact, that recommendation came on my desk last week, and I have stopped it.
What's the pyramid eating? For the black cod, did
The
you say?
question is
That's
whether...
right, the black cod industry.
Hold on a second, love. Tell me
called the
about it.
sablefish industry. We have these funny fish that live in the murky depths, and there are two ways of catching them, one with traps and one with what are called long lines. The traps tend to attract the fish, and because they're cannibalistic, when one fish goes in and is caught and dies, the next one goes in to eat him. And often this gear is lost, and there's some concern that we're catching more than the resource can stand. We have a limited number of licenses, some of which are not being used, and I'm being advised to allow some people to gather these licenses together, buy them from the smaller operators who've not been using them, and put them on large boats so they can put more traps down. And
Well,
I'm
in
just
that case-
telling you, ma'am, that I'm not about to accept that recommendation until I am fully persuaded that it's to the benefit of the industry. And I've drawn the parallel with the pyramiding of salmon licenses in the 70s and all of the overcapacity that has led to, and therefore I am not rushing into any change of policy on the black cod fishery.
Fair enough, ma'am.
Excellent. Could you tell me what do you plan on doing for the 86 fishery then?
Well, no, because I haven't made that decision, and nor will I make an announcement until I'm ready to.
Thank you. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello?
It's you.
Mr. Siddon there, please?
Yes,
I'm
he
here.
is.
Yeah, I'd like to just say a word about sport fishing.
Please.
I've been a sport fisherman for 50 years in BC, and I've watched the destruction of rivers one by one in the north and the Queen Charlotte's, and presently are destroying the rivers on Lyle Island. And I would like to know why the forest industry has not been made to pay for these hatcheries, which are needed to supplement the rivers once the natural spawning beds are destroyed.
Right.
Well, you know, sir, that the forest industry, I'm not taking their side, but I just point out that they are the largest earner of export income for Canada. And that does not justify the destruction of the environment, but it does mean that we have to, in British Columbia, maintain a very precarious balance between the interests of the logging industry and the other habitat interests, which I'm particularly responsible for under the Fisheries Act.
If I can make a blind snide remark, maybe it's the bears on Lyle Island who are blocking Landrick Creek. Wicked little joke. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
Yes, question for Mr. Siddon. I'm wondering what kind of increases we're going to get for our sport fishing licenses in '86.
Well, I suspect that there are going to be some increases, but I'm not prepared to make any decisions on BCTV this morning.
Siddon to hike sport fish licenses in '86 for Pacific waters.
I met on Saturday morning with the Sport Fish Advisory Council. I've been discussing with members of my Minister's Advisory Council ways to generate additional revenue for the purposes of salmon enhancement programs. And I'm afraid we're going to have to ask the recreational sector to consider that a $5 license, given all of the other investment they make and I make when I go sport fishing in the summer, is really pretty paltry.
Go ahead, please, from Spencer's
What
Bridge.
about the American? Is that going to be more?
The American license
Yes.
to fish in Canada?
I mean, to
Well,
be a
I'm-
foreigner to buy it.
I am not going to comment on the details, but I understand your sympathy, sir, for the fact that Canadians who go sport fishing should have perhaps a little more advantage than those who come up here for weeks on end in June and July and sit on the beach and then take our fish home. So
Canning it.
That's right, the
Smoking
canning
it.
that goes
Canning
on
it.
at Campbell
Smoking
River.
it.
So I'm acquainted with the concern, and we'll be taking that into account.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next one. I've got something wrong here.
You're running out of calls.
No, I'm not running out of calls. Spencer's Bridge. Are you still?
I'm there.
Go ahead, please.
While Mr. Siddon is throwing around all this tax dollars money, tell him not to forget, or I'd ask him not to forget the little businesses along the Thompson River. About 5 years ago, or 7 years ago, we were told they were going to close it to salmon fishing. No, they said it was going to be down for 5 years, and that was 7 years ago. Now, from what I understand, that industry really benefits the motels. I haven't seen it, but what they've got is they've got steelhead fishing in a smaller river in shirt sleeves weather, whereas the steelhead, you're out there in 60 below with the salmon running through. Last year they let us play them, but we had to release them. On behalf of the businesses and the potential businesses in this area, don't forget us. I've sent a petition to Greenaway. He's got it in his hands now. I delivered it yesterday, and we've signed up almost every resident of Spence's Bridge because they all remember what it was like. I've never seen it myself.
Well, sir, I'll be seeing Lauren Greenaway tomorrow, and I'm sure he'll pass me that submission. But you indicated we're throwing. You indicated. Well, I don't do things just for votes. You indicated that we were throwing around a lot of tax money. There's not a lot of tax dollars to throw around. But let me tell you.
Let him go and tell him.
Let me tell you that under the provisions of the new salmon treaty with the Americans, we are now able to make major enhancement of the Fraser River system, including the Thompson, and that is going to be a priority under the expanded salmonid enhancement program. And the in-river fishermen, the recreational fishermen upriver, will realize some of the benefit that comes of that.
You're full of little half promises this morning. You seem to have done some of your homework, Tommy. More with Tom Siddon after the break. Well, apart from putting up the price of sport fishing licenses next year and not having enough money to maintain all the fisheries docks and whatnot, and having not made up its mind about the Indian take of salmon yet, I think Siddon's remarkably bright this morning. You know,
it's Monday morning, Jack.
Your government's in such a mess that any intelligent answer from anybody is a step in the right direction.
That's an illusion the opposition are trying to project. We're not in a mess.
Somebody was saying that your government is now characterized best by the two adjectives smarmy and charmy. Smarm and charm. Charm and smarm. We don't need to talk about that. Go ahead, please. Go ahead,
I understand logging is obviously a big part of our economy, but I worked for Fisheries, granted it was 16 years ago, and it was clearing creeks for Fisheries, and it was just unbelievable how clogged some of these rivers are.
That's agreed.
Nothing could get up to spawn, let alone the salmon. You know, it's just.
I think things
like this now have to be cleaned up, and it's logging years ago. The motto was log it to the beach, and in those incidences, they're just trying to get their wood out as quickly as possible to make the biggest return on it.
Oh, fair enough. Don't you think things have improved a little?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. And of course, recently, ministers of fisheries have brought charges under the Fisheries Act, and one of the elements of the salmonid enhancement program is to clean up these clogged streams. And I agree that the forest industry should accept some responsibility for financing and providing the labor to do that. And
go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Siddon?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know what your portfolio was before, and how long does it really take to become an instant expert with these profound things I've heard this morning? Who are your advisors?
Well, ma'am, let me just say that when I was first elected in 1978, I came as a member of Parliament from Richmond, and Steveston and the fishing industry are very important to my constituency. So for 7 years, I have been very close to the concerns of the fishermen and those who extract their livelihood from the industry. I was the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Fisheries in 1979. I was the critic for Pacific and freshwater fisheries for 4 years. I appeared before the Pierce Commission in 1982 and submitted a major brief. So I don't think it's a matter of having some advisor standing behind my back pulling the strings. I think I can do a good job.
But you mentioned it several times this morning that you must be advised.
Oh, I didn't. I don't think I have suggested
yes, you have several
that...
times this morning. Maybe we need somebody from the prairies.
Let's look at it from another perspective. I think it's important that the user groups have a much greater degree of input to the decisions that are reached by ministers than has been the case in the past. That's why this consultation process is so important, and they're my advisors.
Go ahead, please.
Well, good morning, Tom. As a marine operator in the coast here for many years, I've seen fishing boats leave the dock that I wouldn't leave the dock in a life jacket. A case in point is a boat last year left the dock worth about $600. It got lost at sea with 3 people aboard, and the Coast Guard looked at it for 3 days or 5 days, and the cost was over $125,000. I see several fishermen leave the docks without proper gear on it, which is a huge cost to the taxpayers, and everybody seems to dodge the bullet.
You mean safety inspection?
Well, search and rescue, I guess, and the gentleman is suggesting that we should ensure that those who operate small vessels or commercial vessels at sea are aware of their responsibility and the potential hazards. We need better training, and we also should consider the extent to which search and rescue has to be supported by those who have to use it. That is to say, it shouldn't be just a free ride from the taxpayers of Canada.
If I run out of gas in the Gulf, search and rescue will pick me up.
They'll bring a hovercraft in and pull you back to shore, and they won't charge you for the fuel they burned.
Well, they should.
I believe so.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Good morning, Jack. Good morning, Mr. Siddon.
Yes, sir.
Turned fisherman on the West Coast and a member of the Pacific Trollers Association.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a good word from just about everybody on the waterfront in the industry that while you're out here during the next week, that you will be meeting with the PTA. Is this in fact true?
I haven't got a commitment to meet the PTA this week. In fact, I'm returning to Ottawa this afternoon, but I will be out on Vancouver Island for about 3 or 4 days during the third week of February, and I hope to see the PTA at that time.
I see. My next question is in regards to MAC, your Minister's Advisory Council.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the PTA has been harping for some little change or substantial change there, whatever you people refer to it as, in getting us back into MAC, and the other two groups that have pulled out of MAC, and a fourth that is threatening to pull out possibly today, that change has to be made on MAC. And
he's asking you what's happening in MAC.
I appreciate the very constructive recommendations that have been made by the Pacific Trollers and other groups for modifying the consultation structure. I've told MAC at my recent meeting 2 weeks ago that in the second quarter of 1986, that is after the 1st of April, we will be looking at that question, and by the end of June I'll be making some decisions.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Statement first. As a result of either unpublicized or a change in policies, I am forced to lose a fish boat, but instead of the value of that fish boat being dealt with the government under the Fisheries improvement loans, the value is attached to my land, a payment I can't afford, and therefore I've been forced to file for personal bankruptcy. My question, how can you change those policies where, as when I bought that boat, the understanding was that I was dealing with the government should there be misfortune, and now the bank attaches that to my land, which I can't afford?
Well, first of all, sir, I have immense sympathy for your personal situation. The problem we've gotten ourselves into is that under the Fisheries Improvement Loans Act and the Fishing Vessel Assistance Plan, we went around helping people to build boats, and then by allowing them to buy and sell on licenses, we allowed the values of those boats and licenses to escalate, and now people are saying we should come in and buy back the capacity that the taxpayers helped to create in the first place.
Let me ask a question.
It's a terrible mess.
Did you borrow money from the bank and put up your land as security, or have they merely, because you can't make the payments, have they attached your land?
No, I borrowed money to purchase a fish boat, of which I put 25% down to make a livelihood at 50 years of age. Because of misfortune, the boat is no longer worth its value, and the bank says the government is no longer backing that, and therefore they've attached it to my land, and I simply can't make the payments. So I lose my land, I lose the boat, and now I've got to go on welfare or go look for another job.
Sir, could I just quickly summarize what happened? In the period from 1978 to 81, there were a large number of loans guaranteed under the Fishing Vessel Improvement Loans Act, but the government in the legislation limited the government's liability to, I think, $2 million. That liability in helping the banks to meet these guarantees has been exhausted, and there is no longer any statutory authority for the government to help you, which in fact is helping the banks. And we have to find some way to deal with situations such as yours, but it's not an easy problem to resolve.
Well, sir, it's small comfort to say this after the fact. We should have known this, or I should have known this walking into the situation, not being told this when it's too late to do anything.
What happened, sir, was that when they estimated the amount of funds that would be required to meet these guarantees, they didn't know the whole industry was going to fall flat on its face, that interest rates were going to escalate in the early 1980s, and that a lot of fishermen were going to be placed in the position you are, and I sympathize with that.
One little question. Could he at one time have expected merely turning the value of the boat to cover his loan?
Just how do you mean?
In other words, would there have been a system previously on which his land would not have been attached and he would have been rescued by
Well, the gentleman is dealing with the bank, as we all do when we buy a home or make an investment in any property. And the government only guaranteed a particular portion of the money he borrowed to buy that boat. And the available funds to meet those guarantees have been exhausted. So it's the bank's problem. And we are asking the banks to be at least as generous and sympathetic to people such as this gentleman as they have to all the other people who they've helped out with our money.
Oh, and think of it, that's right, the $2 billion for CCB.
The banks cleared out all of this money that we were putting up to guarantee these loans, and now that it's gone, they're putting poor folks like this
if
one.
If he gets in touch with you, will you look at his case? Will you
I'll
look
look
at his
into
case?
it, but if I make an exception by helping him, then I've got a lot of other problems.
Thanks, sir. My thanks to Tom Siddon, the new Fisheries Minister.
Thank you, Jack.
We're going to go to mountain prison. By remote control, kind of, after the break. Before Christmas, November as a matter of fact, I got a letter from a man called K.R. Ewins in the mountain institution at Agassiz. And it was a well-written letter, because if a man's been in jail a long time, he's got time to compose good letters. Now, this is not a bleeding heart program, but there are aspects of it which might cause you some concern. This guy was in trouble with the law from the time he was about 15 onwards. And then in 1971, he got into real trouble. And I want you to listen closely to how he has been treated and perhaps a potential unfairness, because he says, my legal and constitutional rights were in fact violated because I was not allowed to plead not guilty by the judge who passed sentence on him, a horrendous sentence of 112 years. Later on, that's 25, and later on he got an extra 10 years for an offense which called for an extra 10 years consecutive. Anyway, I wanted to watch him closely. And so I went up the valley to the mountain institution and I interviewed Ken Ewins in the visitor's room. I get all kinds of mail in my job, but I have in my hand here a letter, a very literate letter, from an inmate in mountain prison at Agassiz, which is where I am now. And he maintains that he's been denied his fundamental rights and justice, and I'm going to go in and see this inmate and give you part of his story at least and see if there's anything to his major basic complaint of injustice. Okay. You asked me to come and see you, and I've come. Tell me the great injustice that's been done to you.
Well, the great injustice that's been done to me, Jack, is that I feel that my legal and constitutional rights were violated by a magistrate back in 1971 when I appeared before him in Vancouver, charged with 4 counts of armed robbery, 2 counts of confining, and possession of an unregistered firearm.
Okay, what did he do to deny you your constitution and legal rights?
When I appeared before this magistrate, myself and my partner, and after the charges were read to us, we both entered pleas of not guilty and asked for legal counsel to be appointed us, which he granted. We both came back a week later in front of him, and the legal counsel that he appointed to represent us never appeared. So, being traumatized and intimidated by the events of that time, and I figured, well, if that's all I got to look forward to, there's no sense me making an effort to defend myself here, and I changed my plea to not guilty, or to guilty, and my partner kept his not guilty plea. So he accepted it and remanded me for sentencing for 1 week. Now, when I reappeared before him a week later, the lawyer that he appointed did show up, because he couldn't show up the last time because he was representing a guy in a murder beef. Now, the lawyer said, I'm representing Mr. Ewins, and I'm entering pleas of not guilty to these charges on his behalf. Now, the judge said, no, you're not going to enter no plea on his behalf. He pleaded guilty, he changed his plea, and he's going to stay by that. And then he gave me 112 years. He sentenced me to 4 25s, 2 5s, and a deuce. And to serve concurrently, which is 25 years.
And after that, where did you go? Which pen did you go to?
I went to BC Penitentiary.
Now, what unhappy thing happened in the BC pen and when?
Well, in 1972, after I lost my sentence appeal on the 25-year sentence, I become desperate, and I took a hostage, me and my partner and a French guy from down east, and I kept the hostage for 11 hours and then released her unharmed, a classification officer. And then I was taken to court and given 10 years consecutive, which elevated the sentence to 35 years.
All right, let's ask you the brutal question. 35 years, how old were you when you got the first 25?
I was 22 years old at the time.
How old are you now?
37.
When is your release date?
My release date's November of 94.
1994?
That's right.
When do you or did you become eligible for parole?
I became eligible on March the 5th, 1975.
But that was only 4 years after you went down on this 112-year sentences.
That's right, but I'm under the old act of 12 years, you're eligible in 4. That's been changed now that if you're doing 25, you're eligible in 7. But I'm still under the old act.
Or if you're doing life without parole for a brutal murder, you don't become eligible till 15, isn't that right?
15 and 25.
15 and 25. So now, when would you were up for parole in 1975?
That's right.
And that was just disposed of arbitrarily. You didn't get it.
I didn't get nothing, no.
Now, when did you come up for parole after that?
I came up again in 76 and I received nothing again. And then 77, in Matsquay, I was recommended for a temporary unescorted or a temporary escorted program to go see a friend of mine, Dr. Deloriers, an ex-psychologist from BC Penn, which I'm still waiting to get.
That was 1977?
That was in 77.
And now, will you not come up for, don't you come up for parole every few years for sure and go to a parole board hearing?
Every 2 years.
When were you last in front of a full parole board hearing?
In May 19, 1977.
And why haven't you been up since 77? We're now 86.
Well, I've been in the hole 7 years, and I figured, well, if I'm in the hole in the maximum security joint for 7 years, you automatically aren't going to get anything because they refuse to parole big sentences from a maximum security penitentiary, so I didn't apply anymore. I just quit applying.
All right.
I give up.
You're telling me you were 7 years in the hole, and you've got this armload of sentences. We'll get back to the way you were sentenced later on. But this armload of sentences indicates that you must have been very hostile, or you wouldn't have been 7 years in the hole.
Oh, I have to admit that. I was a bit hostile.
But did you go to the hole for 7 years in how many different pens?
In 3 different pens.
Name them.
Millhaven, Prince Albert, and Kent.
And were you punished for punishment, or did you choose to go?
I chose to go on my own hook. I went there because I was fighting with other inmates. I wouldn't sign a protective custody slip and go to protective custody. So I stayed in the hole for 7 years until they'd give me an institution like Mountain Prison where I could function without having to fight.
Okay, you came into the prison on this lot of sentences in 1971 and finished up with a total of 35 years, correct?
That's right.
You wrote me a letter, which was quite impressive in its own way. What kind of education have you got?
No, I just got a GED.
What's that?
It's a general education certificate from the Ministry of Education here in British Columbia.
Equivalent to a grade 12, perhaps?
That's right.
But in your own, when you were a kid at school, wherever it was, where was that, by the way, you went to school?
In North Battleford, Saskatchewan.
Right. What kind of education did you have
That
before
time
you first got into trouble as a juvenile at 15?
Grade 7.
Grade 7 education. Now, let's go to the time you went to court. The letter you wrote to me was really quite touching in its own way. What do you feel was totally unjust about the way you were charged and sentenced?
Well, when I was brought before the court in 1971 before this magistrate in Vancouver.
That's on the 4 charges of robbery, the use of the gun, and the technical unlawful confinement where somebody was used for 10 minutes to allow a getaway.
That's right. I was brought before this magistrate, myself and my partner. We entered pleas of not guilty and asked for legal counsel, and it was granted to us. We were remanded 1 week to be brought back to the court, and though it was time to confer with the legal counsel that the magistrate had appointed, we were brought back, and the legal counsel wasn't there. So being traumatized and, and intimidated at that time, I figured, well, this is all I got to look forward to. I changed my plea to guilty. My partner stayed the way it was with not guilty. So the judge accepted it and remanded me 1 more week for sentencing. Now, when I came back the following week, the lawyer that he had appointed showed up, and he told the court that he couldn't be there the week before because he was representing another man on a murder case, and apologized to the court and said now that he was there, he was representing me and was entering pleas of not guilty on my behalf.
Attempted to change the plea from guilty to not guilty because you hadn't been represented when you made the guilty pleas.
Exactly.
What did the magistrate say, the judge say?
Oh, the judge said, no, this man, he knew perfectly well what he's doing, and I'm going to make sure his plea is staying the way it is. I'm not allowing you to change it. So my lawyer at that time tried to use some type of insanity defense, but that didn't work because I wasn't insane or anything like that. And
he got a man for psychiatric examination.
That's right.
So you went off to Riverview?
For 30 days, for a 30-day assessment.
But you couldn't convince yourself even that you were insane.
That's right. So I was there 17 days, and I said I had enough of this, so they took me back to court. And they just dealt with it. They brought me to the court and sentenced me 112 years.
112 years. Now, that's your basic complaint. You feel this is a contravention of basic justice and your natural rights in that as a youngster, how old were you when you were charged in 71?
I was 22. 22.
22. You pleaded guilty without counsel.
That's right.
And you had a lawyer who attempted to change your plea to not guilty and you weren't allowed to do it.
That's right.
What happened to your partner? I mean, after he pleaded not guilty, you were separated.
That's right.
Did he get the same rugged treatment that you got?
No, he went, his case went on to higher court, and he appeared before Judge Swansiski and was ultimately convicted and received 15 years. And he's been released about 5 years ago.
Did he face the same charge as you did?
He on the bank, yes. He was facing on the bank, he was with me, charged on that, and he got convicted. And that was it. He didn't get charged on the other beefs.
Now, have you tried through the years to try and get anyone? You sent me a letter, attention to any lawyer who will take this case. And you say to them you feel that your constitutional rights were done away with. Spent 7 years, and you say that you will send a lawyer any contract relinquishing 50% of any punitive damages awarded to you as a result of a lawsuit. Now, really, you don't expect punitive damages, do you?
Oh, but I do. I'll tell you why. Because not only my constitutional rights, which I'm invoking in this case, but my legal rights were violated, because it's a basic fundamental right of any man to plead not guilty. And nobody can deprive you of that. Even in Russia, you can plead not guilty. Now, I'm saying that I never appealed the conviction on this sentence, and I'd like a lawyer to come forward and get the transcript and put a conviction appeal for me before the court of BC.
Do you think that's possible now, to appeal a conviction, how many, 15 years later?
15 years later, I say it's possible because I never appealed the original conviction. And
you only appealed the sentence?
The sentence, and that was done through another lawyer.
And that was a different lawyer from the one who had been appointed when you were in front of the magistrate down in Vancouver.
That's right.
And having, you know, and you really expect an appeal. Actually, surely your best bet now for release, if your conduct has been good enough. Has it been good enough?
I would say I haven't had an institutional charge in 5 years. I'd say that I should be given a break and let out.
In other words, let out on parole.
That's right. I've never had a parole in my life.
Now, you must have had, you told me that you've only been out 129 days since May '64. Does that mean that all these years in prison, 15 years, you haven't been outside a prison?
Never been outside a prison, no.
And you couldn't get to see the psychologist you wanted to see?
No.
Now, you're now in mountain prison. Now, that's not maximum security, it's medium security, right?
That's right.
Well, you've been in Millhaven, of course,
That's
which
right.
is maximum. And have you been in Kent?
I've been in Kent.
Which is maximum?
Dorchester, Prince Albert, they're all maximum.
Now here you are. Your behaviour must have improved because now you're in this particular institution.
I'm quieted down quite a bit from what I used to be. I don't involve myself in anything anymore.
And you mix with the general population in this
That's
prison? Right. Well, now, I don't quite know. I know what you're getting at. One of the things that sticks in your craw is the fact that you feel that there are other prisoners of much more severe records who've been in and out. What do you mean by that?
Well, guys sentenced to life imprisonment for murder have come in since I've been in and done 10 years and been released. Now, like, I'm questioning the priorities of the parole board. How can they look at me as being a more serious offender than these people? I haven't killed anybody. I've never been in any sexual offenses. I've never really assaulted anybody physically. I used a gun in an act of an armed robbery. I fired it in the wall of a bank, but...
You fired it 5 times into the roof?
That's right.
You weren't charged with attempted murder or anything?
No, they knew that I wasn't shooting at anybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, what strikes me is that you should have been up in front of the parole board, unless if your classification officer told me that you're so difficult that they can't mix you with the general population. And you are mixing with the general population.
That's right.
Well, I hate to ask you, what, how many times have you managed to get this letter to lawyers?
Well, I've sent, this is the first reply I ever got was from yourself. I've sent them out, you know, and I never got any replies, not even acknowledging receipt of the letters, so I don't know if they're arriving or the lawyers are just playing the outside of me or what.
Well, I've spoken to the first lawyer I had, the legal aid lawyer, and he confirmed the fact that he attempted to change your plea to not guilty. How thick would the transcript be of your case?
couldn't be more than 25 pages. I only had 3 appearances in magistrate's court, and I was never there for more than 15 minutes at a time.
Well, you've done 15 years straight, and before that, you did time as a youngster, right?
That's right.
And then you had a couple of small pen sentences, one for burning down a school.
That's right.
Might as well get it all out on the table. Then you got another 3.5 years with that for escaping lawful custody, attempting to escape lawful custody. And then you come in here on this massive sentence of 112 years. Have you learned anything?
Well, I learned that I don't want to get involved like I used to be with guns. I want to lay that down.
Have you learned anything about... It must be difficult in here. I'm sure if I was in here for 15 days, far less 15 years, that I'd become paranoid. Have you learned to control yourself in the last 5 years?
I'd say I'm in control. I don't get as mad as I used to. I don't threaten as much as I used to. I do
get upset at times.
At times, because like you know, my efforts are met with silence. I'm not getting anything. I'm passed over for everything. You know, like a guy can only take so much of that.
Now tell me, in all these years, do you have friends from the old days who come and visit you at all?
No.
Do you have any visitors at all?
I just have one M2 sponsor from the community here in Chilliwack who visits me.
What's an M2 sponsor?
An M2 sponsor is a citizen of good standing that will come into an institution and sponsor you and will take you to their home and support you on parole, help you get a job.
I thought you told me you'd never been out.
I had never been out.
In other words, your M2 sponsor will come and see you here.
He'll come and see me here. If this institution would allow me to leave, he would take me on a pass.
Mm-hmm. And he's the guy who says he's got a job for you if you ever get released?
Yes, he'd give me a job, yes.
I wonder if you know how tough things are. Not that I'm suggesting anything for this, but you know how tough things are on the outside in jobs these days.
Well, this is a contractor who owns his own business, and he can employ me year-round, no problem, working cement.
Mm-hmm.
There's no problem there.
Well, Ken Ewens, you never been married?
No.
Got no kids?
No.
Got no girlfriends?
No.
In fact, you got no friends?
That's right.
Except the one guy down in Chilliwack. Well, I'm glad I answered your letter. I don't know what I can do about it or what I can raise in the way of interest. Do you think I should? Do you think I should stick out my neck for you and say that you're a guy whom I would guarantee in the community would be flawless in terms of non-criminal behavior?
I wouldn't get involved in any serious crime, if that's what you mean.
Any minor crime?
No minor crimes either. You know, a guy can get pinched for jaywalking or something like that, but I mean no intentional crime.
In other words, you're not a drinker?
I don't drink, I don't smoke.
You don't smoke? And they tell me you jog around here every day?
Pretty well.
Pretty fit?
Oh, yeah.
And if you don't make a break somewhere, you're going to be in here till when?
94.
No. You'll get 1/3 of it off. You'll go on mandatory release, won't you?
I'll go on mandatory release in 1994. I get 1/3 off. You do about 24 solid in 35 years.
Well, I'm glad it's your problem and not mine, but I'll do some checking on your case and report back here.
Well, I certainly look forward to hearing from you. I'd like to see justice done here in this case.
When did you last have a visitor in this room?
I've never had a visitor in this room.
So this is one of your 2 big outings in 15 years.
That's right.
Oh. I'll report back to Ken after the break. Well, I've known many prisoners and many criminals over my lifetime, and I got to tell you that when I finished with Ken Ewens and made my inquiries, you could not help but feel a fair amount of sympathy for the guy. Now, on his basic question, whether or not he had been denied his natural justice, I think that at that time he was. But the prospect of doing anything about it just now, and I've taken some pretty good legal advice on this in the form of a new trial, is virtually nil. I've spoken to the parole board, and they confirm that it's been a long, long time since he had a formal parole hearing, because of the fact, of course, that he was in deep segregation for so many years. And he himself, as he told you very frankly on the program, said he kind of gave up. He was in the hole so long he gave up. Now, what will be done, I'm quite sure of it, will that he will very shortly have a proper parole hearing. There was one scheduled for December which was delayed because of the fact that the psychiatrist had not submitted his report on his examination of Ken Ewan's, which was done sometime before Christmas. I suspect that report will be done shortly and that he will have his parole hearing. And one piece of news is that a lawyer, which I'll give Ken the name privately, has volunteered, a lawyer to whom, by the way, Ken wrote and who meant to answer but didn't answer, is willing to attend at the parole hearing on his behalf. I can understand Ken's extreme unhappiness in the fact that a contract killer or a murderer can come in and go out on a sentence, or has come in and come out, at least two of them, one of them who did a particularly brutal, 2 people were killed, while he's still serving, and he himself has in fact committed no brutal physical assaults on anyone. Of course, the assault in the bank with a gun against the wall. And he was very unlucky, and in front of that magistrate at that particular time, when there was a wave of what they called the Wild West bandits, and he had pleaded guilty, 25, 25, 25, 25, and 12 on the other ones. It's very sad, though, to see a man who's had a couple of visitors and one reply to one of his anguished letters in all these particular years. So my encouragement, he's been out of trouble now for 5 years. He'll probably have to do some time yet, but his best route is the parole route. It probably is the only route, because the hostage taking that he did at BC Penn was a frightening one and caused considerable alarm at that particular time. However, I'm glad I went out to see Ewan's. Gives you an idea. As a matter of fact, if I'd been in there 15 years, I wouldn't be half as balanced as Ken Ewan is, or in such good physical condition either. So I'll write you a letter, Ken, and tell you the name of the lawyer who will appear at your parole hearing, and I have asked the parole board, and I'm sure they'll tell me when the parole hearing comes up. Other than that, Ken, it's up to you. No. A bunch of calls on this, and I don't have much time this morning. I'll take one anyway. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack.
Yes.
Yeah, I know Ken from a long time back. If he's watching, this is Floyd Pepper.
Yes, Floyd.
And the parole system is nothing. A Skinner can get out before somebody that beats up somebody.
Well, the fact is that, I mean, don't be too negative about it. The parole system is probably Ken's only hope at the moment. And I'm very glad I went out to see him and let people see what kind of a guy he is. He's still very tense, but he has not been in trouble for 5 years in the jail, which should help in some way to alleviate his potential problem in the future. Floyd Pepper, you see, did you knew him when?
Oh, we met in PA in segregation.
You were both in the hole together?
Yep.
Thanks, Floyd.
Okay.
Bye. Try another one. Go ahead, please.
Jack, would a chap like a visit in some outside food, like White Spot Clubhouse sandwich or something?
Well, I don't think you need to go into that. I don't think so.
You like a visitor?
Well, you can write to him if you want to at Mountain Institution.
No, but can one go out and visit?
Not unless you've got approval.
Well, you have to ask first.
Yes, yes, yes.
They're required in writing?
I think so.
Okay, good program.
Okay, bye. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I just want to make a statement about him. He's gotten 25 years and he never hurt anybody. He had a
75.
child molester. A lot of them are only getting sentences of 2 years.
Correct.
And they really do hurt somebody.
He is not a sex criminal. He has never actually...
But I mean, he hasn't hurt anybody.
Well, he terrified a couple of people at the time.
Yeah, but he didn't...
And he used the gun at a bad time and firing into the roof. And he hit a particularly hardline magistrate. You'll notice that his confrere only got 15 years from Swensiski in County Court. The magistrate who sentenced Ewan
Yeah, and yet him...
is now
a lot
dead.
of child molesters, though, a lot of what the news is going on, they're only getting 2 years, and some of them are getting suspended sentences. They're allowed out on bail.
Well, I think now...
Awaiting their sentences.
I think that his letter will certainly lead to his regular renewal and appearance at parole hearings, and the behavior is up to Ken. Okay?
Okay, thank
But
you.
thanks for making the point. I'll take one more. Or can I? I'll take one more? Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yeah.
I just want to congratulate you on your humanitarian reasoning there. I think there's been an injustice done here, and I hope you follow through on this and help this fellow out. I'd sure like to see it.
I'll let you know what happens to him, and I promise I shall follow through on the developments, but it's up to Ken, because I take a chance, not in going out there, but in putting a story on the air. You know, I'm saying, this is a guy who deserves at least a reconsideration subject to his behavior. Okay?
Okay, thanks, Jack.
Bye. I've got a little thing I must do after the break. You're going to meet a couple of old tars, Jack tars. You're going to meet able seaman gunner Ed Mason.
Thank you, Jack.
And you're going to meet Petty Officer Bill Beaton, right? And they are here to represent the Royal Canadian Navy Annual Reunion.
Well, not quite annual, Jack. It's only held every 9 years in Vancouver, and the age status that we're all reaching now will perhaps be the last one to be held in Vancouver.
What did you do in the war, Ed?
I was a seaman gunner. I served in the South Pacific Theater mostly, Jack. The last big push in Japan.
Now, what did you do in the war, Petty Officer Bill Beaton?
Well, I was a CNR railway telegraph operator in the 30s, and when I joined up and they found out I was already partially trained, I guess you could call it, they sent me to Ottawa and gave me a total immersion course in Japanese katakana, and I spent the war in naval intelligence monitoring Japanese stations all over the South Pacific.
Fantastic. Now, Tom Gould VC has come. Oh, no, first of all, tell me about the reunion.
Well, it's 3 days and 3 nights, held May the 16th, 17th, and 18th of this year. We're inviting anyone that served in the Commonwealth Naval Forces, that's Wrens or ex-Navy personnel, any merchant seamen that served during any of the wartime theaters. And we expect about 4,000 or 5,000 people to show up, Jack.
It's a big one.
It's
When are you going to hold it?
HMCS Discovery.
That's where you'll have all your functions. And what are you going to do during these 3 days?
Well, we're starting out on Friday with a welcoming party with all bars on the base open. And then Friday night we'll be having a dance with live music. Saturday we're having a wine and cheese party and a grand naval ball and banquet, again with live music. Sunday we're having a salmon barbecue, fresh sockeye salmon barbecue, and a dance again with live music. In between that, of course, we've lined up boat cruises and tours, because our visitors are coming from all across Canada, England, United States, and even from Australia.
Bringing any big noises from the current Navy or the last one? Because Canada had, what, the 3rd biggest Navy
in the world.
The Second World War.
Right.
That's right.
And now it's smaller than Bennett's Navy.
Yeah. But they fixed it up. The ships can go to sea now, can't they?
Yes,
tell me, do tell me they can
they're
go
getting
to
more
sea.
money now.
Now, how many of your VC winners are going to come to this?
We have Tom Gould. He's a Victoria Cross winner from the Royal Navy. We're bringing him over from England. And he's our only, I believe he's the only surviving Naval Victoria Cross winner. We have others. I think we have our celebrated Smokey Smith, who was an Army man, lives in Vancouver.
Matter of fact, I hate to tell you how old you're getting, but I looked up this morning and I said, isn't there a VC coming to this naval thing? And do you know what my staff said in unison?
They're all dead?
No. What is a VC? Wouldn't that break your heart?
It really would.
So when did you get out of the Navy, Ed?
I got out just shortly after VJ Day, about a month after, Jack.
And you too?
November 45.
November 45. Now, how much is it going to cost the veterans to go to this thing?
The total cost for the 3 days and nights is only $70, Jack, and that includes a grand banquet and ball, wine and cheese parties.
Entertainment on the drill deck, eh? Official opening of Naval Veterans Reunion 1986, drill deck dance, bar closes at midnight. I wouldn't guarantee it that if I were you.
No guarantees.
Well, it looks like a great deal altogether, doesn't it?
Jack, may I mention our registration chairman's name and phone number?
Quick.
For anyone wishing information, you have the phone number memorized.
Yeah, it's Dave Burgess, B-U-R-G-E-S, and the phone number is 435-267-8255. 2592.
I was in a troop ship during the war. Does that entitle me to go?
It certainly
You'd
does,
be welcome
Jack.
anytime, Jack.
I must get my wee medals. 435-2592. Dave Burgess.
Right.
As a matter of fact, Ed Mason, I got to tell you this. You got a shot of Ed. You can't get a shot of Pamela, can you? Pamela, you should have been on the set. She's your granddaughter.
She is my daughter,
Your
Jack.
daughter.
Come on.
My thanks very much indeed to Bill Beaton and to Ed Mason. The number to call, 435-2592. I'll be back after the break.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you very much.
The number for the Naval Bash in May is from Bill Beaton, 435-2592. That's Pamela Mason. That's her old dad, Ed Mason. Pamela makes me look beautiful every day. Tomorrow, Joe Granville, the stock market guru of North America, and can make markets go up and down at 9 a.m. precisely.
Expo 86. 88 days to go.
Joe Granville, stock market guru, with Webster at 9 a.m. precisely. Don't play the market until you've listened till My tip is don't play the market, but listen to Joe Granville, North America's top stock market guru, on Webster tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.